For those of you who are new to this place, let me just briefly say that we are a fully independent educational institution. We're very passionate about hosting forums that bring together academic research with community-based perspectives on the vital issues of our times. And we strive to be a place where a new kind of community might be fostered, a community that's very much focused on grappling with the difficult questions of what we need to do right now to bring about more just and respectful relationships across the different communities who are coexisting here in Melbourne, regionally, and indeed transnationally. So we have a very particular, compelling set of issues with which to think about tonight that bear upon these wider interests. And the vehicle for doing this thinking is Losoncz's important new book, Institutional Disrespect, South Sudanese Experiences, here I am, let me wave it, South Sudanese Experiences of the Structural Marginalisation of Refugee Migrants in Australia. Congratulations on the book, Ibi, and thanks very much for bringing it to us. I think it's fair to say that many of us have watched on in recent years with varying degrees of bewilderment, horror, and also perhaps with a sense of déjà vu, as the South Sudanese community has been singled out for what we might describe as special treatment by police, politicians, media outlets, and indeed especially here in Melbourne. So tonight is a very profound opportunity to hear first-hand accounts from three community leaders of how institutional disrespect has been experienced, and perhaps also for us to explore and think about the kinds of solidarity and support that we might be able to work towards, what we might usefully offer. So while tonight's discussion focuses on the experience of resettled refugees in Australia, I'm also particularly keen that we do not lose sight of the circumstances that have led hundreds of thousands of South Sudanese to flee their homeland, circumstances that one of our panellists, James Atem Mayen, has succinctly described as a human-made disaster. So without any further ado, let me stop talking and very briefly introduce the panel in the order in which they will speak. Firstly, we have Dr. Ibolya Losoncz, who is a researcher at the School of Regulation and Global Governance, otherwise known as RegNet, at the Australian National University. Ibi's research focuses on the experiences of resettled refugees in their dealings with the Australian government and social institutions. Ibi is also chair of the board of Companion House, assisting survivors of torture and trauma. Her research has been published internationally, and she describes the book that we're here to discuss tonight as an exploration of the destructive consequences of democracies relying on institutional processes that are deaf to human ears. Very compelling description. So Ibi's going to open our discussion very briefly, and then she's going to return right at the end of the panel to effectively sum up the analysis of her book. Our second speaker is Dr. William Abur at the end of the panel line. William is a social worker and a member of the South Sudanese community. He completed his Bachelor of Social Work degree, Master's degree and PhD at Victoria University. His PhD thesis focused on the resettlement challenges of the South Sudanese community, and he's published widely on this work. William migrated to Australia in 2005 after living in a refugee camp in Kenya for 10 years. During this time, he also worked as a counsellor and a mental health worker. William has worked in Australia as a social worker, and he's currently a lecturer at Deakin University, my colleague, where he teaches critical social work and human rights. Next, we're going to hear from James Atem Mayen, who is also a social worker with a bachelor degree in social and community studies from the University of Canberra. James has worked especially in the area of child and family mental health. Until recently, he was a project officer for the community support group at Wyndham Community and Education Centre, and he's now a multicultural education aide and social worker at Manor Lakes College in Wyndham. And let me underscore again that James spent 13 years also in a refugee camp in Kenya before coming here to Australia. Now, third speaker, Daniel Ajak, was born in Ethiopia after his parents fled their home country of Sudan due to civil war. Daniel spent 13 years in a Kenyan refugee camp before being accepted for asylum here in Australia, resettlement in Australia. He completed a law degree at Flinders University and is now a criminal lawyer working with Victorian Legal Aid in the youth crime team. Daniel has also initiated the establishment of the African Australian Legal Network. I'm not sure if that has actually come into existence yet, but if it has, it's quite new and exciting, I gather. A special advocacy and support group for African lawyers and law students. So please make our panel very welcome. Those of you who've just arrived, please come through and find a seat. And I'm going to hand over to Ibi.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Melinda, and thank you for hosting me here. I also would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country on which we meet today. I acknowledge the involuntary sacrifice of their land and resources, the unresolved historic injustice, and their ongoing struggle for just recognition as the indigenous owners of this land. I also would like to express my deep appreciation to the South Sudanese community here in Australia and in Africa. Their insight and reflections were instrumental directing my attention to the lack of legitimacy of our institutions and their governance. It was their narratives that have taken me to the title of my book, Institutional Disrespect. I am grateful and so honored to have three amazing colleagues of strong voices from the Australian South Sudanese community here tonight. Thank you for taking the time out from your busy lives and to join this panel discussion on the experiences of refugee migrants at the hand of the state. I also would like to thank the Institute of Postcolonial Studies for giving me the platform to share my research. And finally, I would like to thank all of you who decided to come here tonight to share this evening with us and to hear also your comments. So, as Melinda said, I'm a researcher at RegNet. I'm also involved with, for the last 10 years now, with Companion House. And also, you can't escape my accent. It's Hungarian. And I'm from a refugee background myself too, and I came to Australia in 1982. So my book is about institutional disrespect. It's a perspective that recognizes the importance of respect in our relationships and interactions, not only at the personal, but also at an institutional level. Our relationship with the state and social institution is a key issue of our times. Our concern and distrust of institutions have triggered an increasing number of royal commissions into various areas of conduct, including institutional responses to child sexual abuse, child protection and youth detention, misconduct in banking, superannuation and financial services, and the aged care quality and safety. Now, the findings to date from these inquiries have confirmed our growing concern about institutions and organizations in power and how they breached our trust and have mistreated us. The focus of the book is one example of this institutional mistreatment, and that's the mistreatment of refugee migrants by the state and its institutions. In my book, I invite you to consider institutional shortcomings as a source of inequality and injustice. Now, I came to this topic of disrespect in the context of resettlement of refugee migrants, not long after 2007, when the South Sudanese community came under attack by the then Immigration Minister Kevin Andrews, who claimed several weeks before a federal election that Sudanese refugees were failing to integrate into Australian society. Now, of course, these racial attacks by governments tend to happen just before elections. More recently, the community was politicized in 2018 here in Victoria before the state election, with the Prime Minister and Peter Dutton stoking fears about so-called South Sudanese gangs. So just going back to the 2007 attack, what the typical government response was of commissioning over 30 reports at different levels of government. And not much came out of these reports, except that some of the reports have actually included the voices of the community. They have actually quoted the community in some of their vignettes or some of the results from the interviews with the community. And in those voices, there was a single unique theme that unfortunately has never been followed up. And that was the strong feeling of feeling treated without respect or with disrespect. And that was, these voices was the thing that was driven me. I wanted to intellectually engage with that feeling of disrespect, and I wanted to understand the experiences of South Sudanese Australians through the lens of respect and disrespect. Now, my research participants have actually identified 3 main themes of disrespect, and these were the social and economic exclusion in the public sphere, state intervention in the private sphere of their families, and the unwillingness of the Australian government to respond to the marginalisation of their community. So my colleagues that have very generously agreed to contribute their experiences to each of these themes, and we can hear from them. And after that, I probably would like to take another 5 or 10 minutes of your time to talk a little bit more about the consequences at the broader level of these institutional disrespect. So I hand over to William.
Thank you. That is a very impressive introduction, and also the books. When I look at it, it touched my heart. And although the things that have been discussed in the book are not new to me, but it is still something that I prefer to look at it and think about it. It gives me a deep thinking as a person, and also from the community perspective. I just wanted to be critical about myself, and also the community where I come from, and also my colleague here. Based on our current society, it would be nice for us to have a different view, especially if we were to have a female, from South Sudanese who can also come in and talk about some of the challenges that are facing, mothers or female or young people. That would be nice, but unfortunately, we fail to score that. So just me being critical of that aspect. I'm being asked to comment on the area of employment, and in the Western world, most of you know, employment seems to be the most powerful thing that if you want to be stable as individual and also as a family, you must have a distant employment. You must have the employment. And employment can give you a different capital. And when I say capital, I'm talking about social capital, psychological capital, and of course, physical capital. And the example of physical capital is if you are not employed, you cannot be able to go to gym. You cannot be able to pay for the gym membership so that you can go and participate in the gym. That's a simple example that I wanted to give. And if you are not employed as well, your psychological state will be a little bit unstable, because you will be thinking about things that you need to buy for yourself, things that you need to do for your family, things that you need to do to your friends. If you don't have financial source, then you are in a very difficult situation compared to somebody who is employed. Now, having said that, thinking about people that come from refugee background with nothing, with no resources that they have come with, except maybe the clothes that they were wearing on that particular time that they came in. And the example is me. When I came, of course, I came with my wife and my son. That's the only resources that I have brought. But there was nothing that I have. I came and opened my bank account in Australia. So I had nothing. So if you are not employed and you are raising the family, and or you want to progress, it is hard for you to compete, in a society where there is a high level of, the living standard, and and people, you have to compete based on what you have. Unfortunately, you might see some of us here, in the suit, but it is a lifestyle where our society expects us, if you are employed, you should be wearing, a little bit, in a distant clothes. But that's not the case, right? So we would have, I think we've gone over a little bit. So, if you look at what is happening currently with the African community and the South Sudanese community, and especially with the young people and the families that are struggling, part of the problem is actually unemployment. That is a bigger part of it. And if the person is not employed, it is hard for you, to control the family. It is hard for the little Johnny who wanted to get the lolly and is not getting a lolly. So he can just go sneak out and then go and steal lolly in the shop. And those are the problems. And I think my colleague here will comment in terms of legal perspective. In terms of book, there are very difficult issues that we face. First of all, there are issues such as human capital was a bigger issue when we came. People were not having enough skill to be able to, to go to the workforce. So that was one of the issues. And of course, that was some years back. And if I were to revise it now, it cannot be the first the first priority for me if I were to list what are the obstacles that are blocking people not to go to employment or to the workforce. But when we came, yes, it was number one, because of language issue. At the moment, I don't believe that it is really still in number one. There are some issues that are really, that may jump into that position of number one, number two. And one of the issues is also lack of connection. and some of you will agree with me here, that we get jobs sometimes based on our network. And if your network is very limited to the South Sudanese community or to the African community, it is just hard for you to get a job. So that is a challenge by itself. So people were not, there's no proper engagement. And I look at what is happening in America compared to Australia. And of course, the issues in America are quite different to some of the issues that we face here. And because I'm saying this because some of my colleagues went to America and they were either supported by individuals that hold their hand and say, okay, there is a forum, there is a group of my friends, I will take you there and I will introduce you. Some of the organizations, such as churches, also took a responsibility to make, to provide network and introduction. That helped the group of lost boys that went to America. That is not the case for us here. For us here, yes, Australia is a very, we are in a privileged position. We are, of course, multicultural society. We are minded sometimes, but the politics, the recent years, politics has changed, and it has seen the view were really very bad to the African community, and especially South Sudanese community. They are just like troublemakers, people who are not able to integrate, they are not able to, to engage with the mainstream community. But that's not the case. If you want a easy community to be engaged in Africa, if you were to go in Africa, and easy people to connect with are people from South Sudan. They are outgoing and very easy people to engage with them. And I think you will agree with me because based on your research. Because once we trust you, we say, it's so easy for you to know my story, it's so easy for me to hear some of my, challenges or some of my exciting things that I have. So those are the things that some of us in Australia did not view the South Sudanese as a troublemakers, and that's where the word African can come from. And some of you, you read it and you have seen it. And of course, yes, I don't necessarily agree with what the young people were doing or what they are doing, but unfortunately, it seemed to be a bigger issue that is facing the community at the moment because of the trouble that young people are causing. And that has generalized all of us. And even me, when I work in a university where, I go in a meeting sometime, and when I go, some of my colleagues, if I come and sit before they know me, so they are like, when they see me, they are like, oh, are you lost? Are you in the right place? And that is that's the question that I get used to. And I just ignore and I just say, well, I need to be here. Yeah, so I just say I need to be here, and I'm here, and I participate, in a discussion, and in my recent time, in my current role, I'm lucky that I sit between the two professors that are also from indigenous background, and I hear some of the difficulties, the pain from their community, the challenges, the colonization, what happened to a generation, and the stolen generation. One of them is actually one of the stolen generation, and they share the story with me, and that sometimes puts some of the things that I think So we have a role, we have things to do. Each and every one of you here, you have a role. As a human, you have a role to change the society. You have a role to make this society better. And the only way that you can do is through discourse. It's through challenging your colleague, your family member, to say, okay, I hear you on this perspective, but have you thought on this perspective? So sometimes it is okay to be critical. It is okay to challenge somebody to say, well, William, yes, what you are saying, this may be one side. Have you looked at it in this side? And you may have the platform of changing the perception of that particular human being or of that particular person that is talking to you. So my challenge to you all here is that we all have a role. We all have a role to share our experience, to share our knowledge, to hold hand or to support people that need to be supported. And of course, we, especially the people from marginalized society, they are there, they are looking for support, they are looking at us. And it is a good platform for us sometimes, to say, yes, I can do something. And I wanted to finish with the egg boy, with the example of the egg boy. I think he made changes. He has done a brilliant job. Although it would not acceptable for me to see him, doing it in that way. But of course, that little action it put him in a platform that somebody who was quite critical about either Muslim or refugees, got somebody within Melbourne that say, hang on, you know what? That is your view, and this is my view here. Yeah, so he's a young boy, he's a young person. He has gone in extreme, but he would have done it in a different way, but he passed his message. He did very well. Yeah. Yes, just want to stop here so that some of my colleagues can just take the platform also. But feel free to ask me a question, and I'm very much open for whatever question that may come up later. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Over to James.
Thank you, William. It's a very good reflection. My name James, as mentioned before. Very good introduction, and thank you, Eve, for your book. Very, very good. And I just wanted to start with this quotation from your book, Institutional Disrespects. With South Sudanese, and you mentioned family is integral element of South Sudanese. Any kind of disrespects, intervention is an insult to their culture and community. And there has been so many interventions, and I will go back to when South Sudanese arrived to Australia between 1996, and majority of people come in 2003 to 2004. I came 2005. And coming to a new place is always very challenging, and especially when you come to the developed world that have a freedom of everything. And that that freedom has been misused by some of the members who's in the South Sudanese community, and is one of the challenge up to now. And this is because the institution, the Australia government, this is not a blame. I will have a positive part and a negative part as well within the South Sudanese and within the Australia government. The institution have not given the right information to the people when they first arrive. The first service providers for people who just arrived at misled the Australia government, and they misrepresented the South Sudanese community. With their funding from the government, all the quote that the institution like the government have used coming from those lines. And words like South Sudanese are difficult to integrate, they are uncontrolled, they are uneducated, they come from those services providers. And these are the institutional disrespect that you talk about. South Sudanese person will either die in dignity rather than seeking any help at all. And I repeat this, I was a participant with Abur thesis in 2007. I was one of the participants. By then I was not yet as an Australian citizen, so I was a permanent resident. And the statement from a former migration minister, Kevin Andrew, was a big insult to the South Sudanese community. And by the way, in Melbourne here, South Sudanese are 0.something%. And if you can see why the politicians, the media, the rest of the community are focusing on 0.something% population, you will see there is something wrong within the institution, and that need to be fixed. Academia and those who are in favor of the minority are also raising voice, and that's why we are here today as well. Thank you for your book, this institutional disrespect. You are raising a voice of minority. There are some part that the South Sudanese young people are not doing very well, and I will not hide that. There are some part that young people are not doing very well. But the South Sudanese community don't deserve to be labeled by the act of one or two people. So, and if you label a community by the act of one or two people, then you are insulting that community, and that's disrespect completely. A community that have a very high level, and I will quote your in your book, South Sudanese have high motivation to ensure their children conform to the standard and responsibility. So that's where I was raised up. I was raised by my parents. I was actually raised in a farm to be a responsible person within whatever discipline they will do to me. It's not because they are killing me or they are hating me. They wanted me to be like them. And we lost. The South Sudanese have lost that legitimacy with their kid. I am working in a school, and I see a lot of the South Sudanese young kids, the way they represent themselves is not a South Sudanese way. We blame it to Australian, and they blame it to South Sudanese, and where are they? Okay? They grown up in Australia, and they are actually fast to learn more than their parents. Did they learn the right thing, or did they learn the wrong thing? to South Sudanese, they will say they have learned a bad thing. And that bad thing comes from the institution. And the Australia will say, oh, they come, even those who are born here, and majority of the young people are born in Australian, those who are now doing some of the inappropriate behaviors, I will not label them as a gang. They are like any youngsters, they are like any peer group. And by the way, the culture where we come from, you never see a South Sudanese person working alone. They work in a group, they loudly spoken, they outstanding, and that bring fear to members of the public. Just wait until they do something, and then you fear them. So my color, my eye will not, if three of us just walk here, I think many of you will run away. That's our height. What do we need to do? And that's our body build. We cannot hide at all. And if you fear it, then that's your problem. It's not my problem. Okay? So there are a lot of things that happen. Now, back to young people. I do agree there are young people that are not doing very well, especially in relation to school. And that power of two culture play a lot of role. And maybe I've been talking to some of the parents anyway, the role of multicultural liaison officer or multicultural education aid is to work with kids as well as with parents. I've been calling some of the parents and they do say, look, James, I fear my son. He have a right that I don't even know. If I do something, I will be in a trouble. I rather not do anything. So the parents are powerless in this climate because there is child protection, there is police, there is everything that will get involved. And in fact, the institution like a school, when your child come to school depressed, they will report it. Yes, they will report it. That the school is a reportable authority. Okay, if the child is not happy because he have a tough night with the parent, which is normal for the South Sudanese, it will be reported, and that will bring a lot of problem to the parent. So they rather not doing anything to the child. They try to talk, and if the child don't listen, they will leave. And that is Australia's child, it's not a South Sudanese child. If they do something bad, treat them as an Australian child, not a South Sudanese child. And that's what I can say. South Sudanese family is very important. It provides financial support, even when there is no work. Even when there is no job, there is no employment, family is the first, and I just came to learn in Australia. I've been to different countries before I came to Australia, and I just came to learn in Australia that the freedom, even if I was in South Sudan, my mom will not leave me to go and live by myself, even if I'm married and have a couple of kids. So the importance of keeping family together, and that the freedom that I said before is being misused by some of the members of the migrant community. They said freedom, Australia is a land of freedom. That's wrong freedom that they pick up. Yes, freedom of speech, present yourself, don't be violent, talk nicely to people. These are the freedom that people want, but it's not a freedom that you just go and hang somewhere, do something wrong, and you think that the parent will not talk to you. So some of the parents are very powerless. Comparing the second generation, which I am actually working now with them, with the first generation that came to Australia, they lack resilient, and they have no motivation, which we have strength, that resilient and motivation. And that's why some of us, like William Abur, become now a doctor within a very short period of time. He came here over 30s, did very strongly, become academia in Australia. Although your color is still actually discriminated you, but what can we do about it? Okay, we got a young lawyer. I would say half is likely to be a first generation because you will hear from him, his accent is not like a South Sudanese. If he call for interview and he speak to a Australia employer, he will be accepted, but when they see him in person, they will decline. I think such prejudice are there. There is assumption that tall black person speaking second language don't know anything, but that's wrong assumption, by the way. I am very competent even before I came to Australia. It took me only 2 weeks to get my professional job with Companion House. I did an interview with doctors and people with qualification, but because the organization was looking for someone with a cultural background, I got that job. I did it, and I believe maybe Companion House will give a feedback. I don't want to make myself proud. I did my job within 15 years of my work in Australia. I did my job very perfectly. It doesn't mean that there is no kind of disrespect happening. And I can assure you, I am very happy when I am in my house. But every minute I step foot to the street and to the public, I will come back with some set. Some do it deliberately, some do it without knowing it. Okay, if I appear in the bus or public transport and someone try to use a body gesture, how will you feel? You feel sad. So maybe it was not intention, but that will upset you. You feel you belong. At the same time, you feel excluded. So these are the things that are happening within the institution, and what really makes me very unhappy is the motivation we have. We should have actually carried on or passed it on to our young people. But I'm seeing they are overpowered by the system that actually disadvantage them. So if I talk to young people, what is the motivation? Look where the journey of your parent, for them looking for safety and a better place to bring you here, and you are misusing this opportunity. Some will reflect that this, and there are sometimes you will agree that there are institutional overpowering or the system that will actually disadvantage some of the young people. Language itself, and if I mention, I rarely mention discrimination, but prejudice come through your color and through your language. And there is a power in language. Whoever speaks the language better will discriminate the person who don't speak better. But discrimination don't work like that. I can't discriminate a woman. I can discriminate a white person. So some kids are misusing that word, oh, they do like this because I'm black. No, that's not the case. But there are some way that you will see that application happening in other way. So I will stop from there and I will leave it to my colleagues. Discipline, I would have talked about it. And I did mention before, if parents are not parenting their kid the way they should have done it, how are they going to raise their kid? Who have shown them the current parenting role? This should be the work of institution as well. Well, we are here now trying our level best, and in my last job, I left for the first time 15 years in Australia. I never been warned. Just a warning, I never been warned. Because I know I'm different. English is my second language. I make sure I do double job. So to be accepted. But in my last job, I left with a feeling of discrimination. I would say that. Because if you never been warned or given a verbal warning for the last 15 years and you feel uncomfortable, then there must be something very wrong. So there are such a thing that happening to some of us, Dr. William mentioned before, happening every day, but this is not a complaint. Australia is the best place, and I do educate young people to learn, to adapt to the system, and be members of the community, though they are excluded. I will stop from here. Thank you.
Daniel.
So just a caveat, because I'm a public servant, so and my chapter is to respect the hands of the government. So I work in Victoria Legal Aid, so just to put it for the record, so I speak on my own accord, not on behalf of Victoria Legal Aid. So anything I speak about in relation to the chapter and my personal experience doesn't. It's got nothing to do with legal aid and my own views. And William initially sort of criticised the panel being a male-dominated panel. If I can say that, despite luck that I sit with you tonight, because I was never part of the panel. I wasn't aware of this launch. I wasn't aware of Postcolonial society. It's when one of my colleagues, who she's not yet tonight, her name's Ibolya. She's also she's got a law degree and she practices as a migration agent. She's South Sudanese and also about my age. I'm 28, so we share the same journey, having migrated and sort of grown up and gone through school system. So I think she's travelling tonight, heading overseas for holidays, so she couldn't sit in the panel. And then she's volunteered my details to Evie.
So welcome, Daniel. You're our token woman for the night.
Yes. So So I find myself here, and look. If some of you have read the book, so on chapter 17, the keywords Evie sort of highlighted were cultural awareness, developmental partnership, capacity building, and resettlement policy. So I'll speak from a different perspective from the two of my colleagues, because I'm 28, I came in when I was 13, so I've had a different experience compared to them. Doesn't mean I've had it easy. And it doesn't mean they've had it easy either. So I'm looking from the lenses of growing up as a teenager, and then maybe some of you guys might be able to see how maybe some of the experiences I've had have led other young South Sudanese might have also had the same experiences, and then they've just obviously how they've dealt with those experiences might have led them in other ways. You might obviously, like I'm a lawyer, so when people hear that I've come here as a refugee, you've done really well, they're like, oh yeah, like they're really proud, and I don't try to take away from that. It's it's really, like I'm proud of what I've achieved, and I hope to inspire. I hope young South Sudanese kids who are younger than me or some of my peers can look up to me and be like, if Daniel's a lawyer, so that maybe I can either be like Daniel, or I can do better, or maybe I can just, work. So if I can launch the topic, when we first came here, so I came with my older sister. She would have been 21 or in her early 20s at the time. I was 13, so there's just the two of us. We had an uncle who's also who will have similar experiences to James Atem. He's a lost boy and left home. If any of you have read on the Sudan Civil War, so he's one of the lost boys and would have left home, like board where me and James are from, like maybe in the late 80s or mid 80s. I'm not sure how old he was then, but he would have been around maybe 11. So left his mum and dad and his family, go on to join the liberation movement, where he's trained and then moved through various. I can't speak on his behalf. I'm not sure if he ever fought anything, but he's then up in the camp, and that's where he's gone to school there, and he was smart. He was smart enough to in the early 2000s, after he completed our equivalent of VCE, he got a scholarship through the I think it was Jesuit Refugee Services, JRS, which at the time, I think in the early 2000s, were giving out scholarship to some of the kids in the Kakuma refugee camp, who were sort of in the high ATAR level across the Kenyan secondary exam. So he came out with many others in those years, and then so he came out in 2002 and settled in Adelaide. And then 2 years later, the Hard government commenced a humanitarian program to do an intake for the Sudanese refugees, and it's through then with me and my sister applied, and he sponsored us. So I ended up in Adelaide, and mum and dad never come here. And so when I arrived in Adelaide, he was at university at the time, doing engineering, civil engineering, University of South Australia. So already I had a role model, there would have also, because of the war and the life in the camp, a lot of people would either never had opportunities to go on to school, or had their school interrupted. So there weren't many South Sudanese going around that were illiterate, or who were who had got to his level. So when I arrived in Adelaide, I went. He was our interpreter, so he took us all our appointments. He was my guardian, and also took care of my sister as well. So he took us to all our settling appointments to get our Medicare, and he had already lived there for a couple of years. All that sort of process came easy. So then when I enrolled at a language school, which I think is part of the settlement policy to help integrate newly arrived migrants, trying to equip them to then flush them into the school system. So I went to the Atem School of English for a year. I was taught English, and then depending on how old you are, or how quickly you can advance through that program, and then you flush out into the state school. And again, because I had the aid of Abraham, that whole process was made easy, because when I went home and I was asked to do a journal article about my weekend, or I was given a simple maths problem to do, I had someone to turn to, and I was helped. So that was easy. I went to state school, and then again I went to public school in year 9 and 10, and at that time I was still living with Abraham. So so whenever I had a maths, science, English question, I just turned to him. So I was able to manage to get my straight A's because of him. and this is where sort of shortcomings of the settlement programs comes in. So after year 10, I leave the state school and I get a scholarship to an all-boys school in Adelaide, Prince Albert College, and this is through, whilst at the state school, I'd met a Chinese migrant, just like me, but also he was an economic migrant. He was in fleeing the war, and he was a bright kid. But we built a friendship because at school, you know, I went, and like I'm not going to blame some of the kids I went to school with, but I happened to have gone to school in a disadvantaged areas of our communities, like we have here in Melbourne, where those kids, you know, have gone through generational welfare and just been neglected by the state, and sort of, you know, like, the amount is really bad, and they'll sort of, you know, they'll throw racist remarks at you, and when I was growing up in the camp, if someone respected you, you know, you responded like violently, so then I'd do it next time again. So I'll get into fist fight all the time. So I happened to stick up for my Chinese friend, you know, and I got into a fight and then we became mates. You know, so, and he was really smart. So again, like, I had another person, you know, I'm not being stereotypical, but I had another person who sort of came to my aid, and when we became mates, and it was his idea. I had no idea about private school, you know, and because I had helped him so much, and he trusted me, but when he decided he's going to apply for a scholarship to go to the private school, he said, Daniel, like, I'm doing this, you know, let's do it. So we applied, and then again I was fortunate because when we arrived in 2004, Abraham was already established and was not a local Uniting church in Grenadiers where we were staying. So I went to that church as well, and I was 13, I think, and in the Sunday school, the oldest kid at the time might have been 7, so I was 13, and then there was this 7-year-old, 5-year-old, and 2-year-olds. And at the start of the service, the priest or the person who's doing the sermon will bring us forward and then talk to us, and then we're sent off to go into Sunday school, where we draw like pictures of biblical pictures, and we're taught stories, and then there's always like some juice or cakes, you know, just to bribe you. So again, like at a young age, when I was 13, and I was a bit mature enough to come here. You know, I had an opportunity to really interact with Australian kids, you know, from an early age, and I started learning birthday wasn't a thing, you know. But I was at this church where every month birthday was celebrated. So my birthday is in April, and a couple other kids too in April. So every April, it's our birthday. So then I progressed, and so I progressed through that as well. So again, I had another sort of system where, you know, I was learning to sing, you know, like Jingle Bells, Are You Happy? And you know, like all these, yeah, all these, yeah. So I think opportunities have been thrown at me, and then so when we applied the scholarship, it turns out these were friends of Abraham, but had now become our friends because we were living with Abraham, and sort of became my Australian parents, Lisa and John Priscilla. When I applied for the scholarship at Prince's, I asked the church to write me a support letter, and I think the criteria to get the scholarship in year 11 and 12 is that you had straight A's and you came from a disadvantaged community, and there's some potential in you. So the church wrote a letter. John never told me, but it turned out John was an old boy and had gone to Prince's, and here's the irony, because I also applied at another school, St. Peter's Boy, which were our rival, which were Prince's rival, and they're an Anglican school, and Prince's is like a Uniting Church / Methodist. and my mother's an Anglican priest, but she didn't live here, and I had put that in my application to St. Petersburg. I had emphasised that my mother's an Anglican priest, that I went to an Anglican church in Adelaide, and that I was a member of the youth, but I didn't get an interview, and so and my Chinese basically didn't get an interview. We both got interviews as princes, and we both got full scholarship. And we went on to finish high school there, and he won the Ducks. So he actually now lives in Melbourne, and he's a doctor, and he works for the CRSO, and then I've gone on to become a lawyer. So I've been fortunate to have support system in place all the way through, and this is where it almost fell apart. So when I went to Princeton in year 11, my sister and my uncle had a fallout. So me and my sister got commission housing, so we've moved into commission housing, because if you're a refugee, that's where you get settled, or if you're disadvantaged and you can't afford rent, and then you go into commission housing. So me and her moved into commission housing, and Abraham is no longer in the picture. And I'm at Prince Alfred, enrolled in the IB International Baccalaureate Diploma, and I was like, what? I'm doing physics, chemistry, like high-level sort of university stuff, English, Spanish, and I'm really struggling. And my sister never, she never, our culture, and when we were growing up in the camps, girls weren't, school wasn't a thing, school wasn't pushed. So she all her life she'd been discriminated against, because I was put first. And her role was to sort of, to help with the household. So she wasn't well equipped to help me. So all I could turn to were the homework clubs that were ran by the Australian Refugees Association, and these homework clubs ran through the states once a week. So every Monday I had that opportunity to go to the homework club after school. But these were volunteers, these were university students, people like you, who wanted to give back to the refugee community, attended that. But if that day there was no physics or chemistry teacher there, or a maths specialist teacher there, I couldn't get the help I need. And the school themselves didn't pick it up, so Princeton didn't pick it up. They just, they didn't, and I didn't know how to put it at the school, maybe it could help me some tuition. So I struggled through my years at Prince's, and after year 11 I eventually reverted back to SAFE on the advice of the IB coordinator, like SAFE is the equivalent of ECE, and I wouldn't have completed it, but I can tell you, if I had Abraham in the picture, I would have that would have been a much easier transition for me. But the school never picked it up, The government never picked it up, the policies never picked it up. And in a lot of South Sudanese homes, there's no one like Abraham. Those people are just not there. And I look at some of my mates and some of my cousins who are my peers, who are my age, who sort of, not because of their own, not because they can't, but they just haven't been as fortunate as I have. They haven't had someone in their household, to look up to, to be like. So after school, I went into engineering for a year because I wanted to be Abraham. And when I was living with Abraham, all his peers spoke highly of him. Education was the thing. James initially touched that. His peers are very resilient, and that's correct, because I've lived in a camp, that's a lot of trauma, but some of the stuff William and James have been through, that's another level, that's something someone shouldn't have to go through, but despite all of that, they've managed to come out on the other end, and managed to succeed and give back to the society. So in terms of settlement policy, I think that's one thing the government got wrong. You can't, how do you they would have known, or if they didn't know, they would have known that in these camps, the school system weren't set up, or that a lot of parents or single parents just didn't have the tertiary, like your kids would be lucky, or what if I get married and have a family now, if my kid's got an essay, I can look at it, because I can read and write. But my sister couldn't look at my essay, So as people sort of work in this sort of space, what can you do, to sort of reach out to these kids where, there are no books at home, or there's no culture, or there's no someone, at home who, who's either a professional or who's got the capacity and ability to sit down with a young person and read with them, and which are things we take for granted in Australia, and if we're really going to shift the way things are at the moment. I'm a defence lawyer, so I moved to Melbourne in 2017, and this is at the height of the alleged like APAC gang. And one of the motivations I moved from Adelaide to Melbourne was, I knew that there was an Sudanese African or black lawyers in the Magistrates Court. There wasn't one of us around the traps, around the trenches, putting up a fight for people who look like me, and I decided to come to Melbourne, so I can, so when I'm in court, I'm not only just appearing for Mr. Ajak, I'm appearing for Mr. Smith or Mr. Hutchinson, other kids of African background who at court for their own matters or for whatever reason can be like, well, Mr. Ajak, just to change the perception that that if you're not Anglo, you tend to be an accused, and I think, and again also, that's not an institution or system, sort of educating themselves and to. I think like more needs to be done, and obviously like if we can help young people in terms of development to get into these sort of spaces, whether it's policy or people lawyers or people who are in medicine, then can you really start to see some of the changes. Like in South Australia, I can't speak about the Victorian experience because I've been here for a couple of years. But when I was at the Crown Solicitor's office, half of the bench, like the Chief Justice, he's Greek. So he's, when the Greeks came here, they went through, like they had it tough, So it, and obviously we might have it tougher because of our skin tone, but I think there's a lot to be said. If the government's always had good intentions, otherwise we wouldn't. The Australian government would not pledge or sponsor the South Sudanese migrants to come to Australia. So I think it's how it harness our good intentions to make the most of the opportunities here.
Thank you so much for these wonderful contributions. I really appreciate it. And yeah, so many insights in the stories, but also just thank you for sharing your personal stories. And I said that, I'd like to spend about 10 minutes to kind of go back to the more theoretical aspects of my book and talk a little bit more about that. And it's just kind of reminded me that when I was doing my fieldwork for my PhD, because this book is a result of data that I have collected for my PhD, And I have spent so much time with the community, about 2 years here in Australia and also in Africa. And I came back and I did the analysis of my data and, did write up a lot of my results. And my supervisor kind of came to me and said, well, that is all very nice, Ibi, but, you need to theorize now here. So take it to the conceptual level. And I really didn't want to do it. I resented it because I wanted to remain with the stories, the richness of the stories, these experiences that the three of you has just shared with us. And it was so hard for me to move out from that and to take it to that kind of more colder conceptual level. And so you're probably going to be really resentful with me now for taking you out from this wonderful space, from this rich experience and data, and to talk about the kind of the more theoretical aspects of my book. But I guess I probably owe that to my book and also to the community who has given me the data from which I arrived to those conclusions. So, and then maybe after that we'll still have opportunity to go back and hear more about from you, from the three of you. It's just, it's taken me back to where I was 3 or 4 years ago. It was a beautiful time. Thank you. So I guess, as I said, I really want to speak about the broader destructive consequences of democracies relying on institutional processes that are deaf to human needs, whether it's the needs of the South Sudanese community or indigenous community or people with disability. And I see these systemic malfunctions falling under two main streams. The first one is the disconnect between goals and means, and I'm going to explain that. And the second one is highly bureaucratic and unresponsive institutional procedures. Now, a consistently emerging theme from this research is the disconnect between the cultural goals. These are the goals that all members of our society strive to achieve, and the social structures providing or restricting access reaching these goals. And here I used theorization from Robert Merton or his typologies of adaptation. And in a sense, current Australian resettlement policies are dominated by a strong emphasis on migrants adopting their new country's cultural goals without a corresponding emphasis on ensuring that there are effective means or pathways for immigrants to achieve these goals. Now, the two important goals for the South Sudanese community was their social and economic contribution and the future of their families. Both of these goals are affirmed in Australian cultural values, so there are no cultural problems in here. So the constant public and political emphasis for the need of shared cultural goals and values is unclear, unnecessary, and really problematic. On the other hand, pathways to achieve these goals and ambitions in the form of education and employment, they are kind of regulated and guided by codes of conduct, government protocols, and essential characteristics of the bureaucracy, such as systemization, professionalism, impersonality, accountability, uniformity. Now, these mechanisms are designed to give effectiveness, integrity, and robustness to government authorities and institutions. And ironically, they refer to as mechanisms of fairness. But the actual ritualistic applications of these protocols and procedures is dysfunctional and unresponsive to the needs of newly arrived refugee communities, as we have just heard from our three speakers. Thus, these mechanisms of fairness becomes a charade, as government institutions no longer provide equitable pathways to shared goals and ambitions, but rather serve those who are invested in these systems and those who know how to work the system, or actually game the system. So, for example, in the case of economic inclusion, refugee immigrants are not entering the labour market on equal terms with people who grew up in Australia. By failing to account for the marginalisation of refugee migrant groups, These processes actually block pathways to economic participation, producing economic stratification. Many humanitarian migrants experience severe social and economic disadvantage. So my example of the Building a New Life in Australia, which is a recent survey that have surveyed humanitarian migrants who arrived from 2016 onwards, found that over 23% of these recently arrived humanitarian migrants experience more than one type of hardship due to shortage of money, compared to 8% of the broader Australian community. This economic stratification in turn leads to breakdown in bonds and social trust in our community. Now, for South Sudanese, immigrants' pathways were really important. The community had enormous passion and high self-efficacy and entered into universities in large numbers. But they were largely blocked from joining the labor market, and their contributions were also ignored. And whilst the community's efforts in the public domain to achieve economic participation have received little support from the government, authorities have been quick to intervene in the private domain of family, responding to reports of family conflict and child neglect. These interventions left many participating parents, both men and women, feeling that their status as parents was being threatened and challenged. Now, this brings me to the second systemic malfunction, and that's the absence of responsiveness in our government institutions. Now, this is, of course, not unique to refugee immigrants. Just a couple of days ago, a former Centrelink robo-debt compliance officer lodged a disability discrimination complaint with the Australian Human Rights Commission. He is totally blind, and he claims he was routinely shamed and later sacked for working too slowly and not meeting the government's aggressive debt recovery targets. Mr. Donoghue said, "I was always in trouble from the department for being too helpful to customers." So when someone actually, despite those protocols that restrict us, have actually tried to respond to the actual needs of their clients, the system would actually sack them or exclude them from their position, penalize them. Now, in the child protection space, the damaging effect of highly bureaucratic and formalistic processes is a consistent criticism of the system. It's not specific to the South Sudanese community. Instead of supporting families to adjust to the new cultural and legal environment, the needs of the South Sudanese community were ignored, resulting in a downward spiral until child protection could justifiably be called in. And I propose the government intervention was used to break the South Sudanese culture rather than finding ways to connect its strengths with the Australian society at large. This points to profound problems in our state that disrespecting justice and inclusion and the breakdown of legitimacy of our institutions. It points to institutions that instead of supporting people and families, destroy their capacity. It points to a system that punishes the most vulnerable by breaking families through punitive debts, legal fees, and removal of children from their families. A system that is preventing people from institutional pathways or actually luring them down those pathways and making them pay for it through accumulated educational fees, but with no jobs in the end to pay for those educational fees. Now, Merton explained not only the goals and means, but also explained how a system breaks people, how people become disengaged and retreat and withdraw, or turn to disapproved or illegal pathways. And I guess that's what I find really sad about this, that although we have some amazing examples of people in here who have actually managed to find, despite all the blocked opportunities, to contribute to our society in such a meaningful way, there are many others in their communities who actually, their contribution becomes their brokenness by actually sustaining this predatory capitalism and its industries of mental health, social work, jails, and other institutions. Now, the issues faced by the South Sudanese community are by no means unique to them. They are not a consequence of their culture or value or heritage. They are about governments failing their citizens. Yet it is amplified in their case, and South Sudanese and other marginalized communities bear the brunt of it. So despite the evidence, the systemic exclusion of immigrant minorities is not acknowledged by the Australian government. They are still picking on individuals or individual communities, or particular minority groups are singled out, blamed, and vilified. So I would like to conclude with the words of one of my participants to this research. He said to me, "We have so many wars to fight ahead of us. We are fighting a war of being refugees. Then we are fighting a war of proving that we are refugees. We are fighting a war of being different color. We are fighting a war of our accent, our grammar, and now we are fighting a war of getting a job. And we have to compete regardless of all our disadvantages. This is how this country is." And I'm really sorry that I'm not leaving you on a more positive note, but I'm convinced that, some of our guest speakers might probably going to give you with a more positive story. Thank you.
Thanks, Ibi. Thanks, James. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, William, very much. We have a little bit of time now to throw over to all of you for questions or comments or other kinds of discussion on this remarkable set of stories and provocations and issues. Yep, Rima.
This is a comment rather than a question, but the Kathleen Sound Library in Carlton is running a homework night, Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. They're always looking for tutors, so if you'd like to continue from here, show up 4 to 6 p.m. Monday to Wednesday. Kathleen was that? Kathleen Sound Library. So that's the City Library Network. It's on the corner of Faraday and Cardigan Street. Do show up, and always looking for people.
Oh, good. I would like to encourage people also, please feel free to have a question. It will not embarrass us, as you hear from Ajak. There's a lot of benefit that we get from Australia. If we were in overseas, we would have not been a lawyer, or I would have not been, a doctor. So this is a contribution from Australian society to have, and it's something that we have to acknowledge, that people like you who are very keen to listen to to disadvantaged people are the people that made us the way we are, and the example is from Ajak's story, and of course what you just say. If you go and help one kid there, that kid will remember you. Yeah, they will. I remember my teacher that helped me before. I remember. I forget most of the teachers, but there's one teacher that I remember. This is the person that moved me. Yeah.
I'm going to take it. Is that a hand up? Yes. Okay. Thank you. My name's Diana. I'm from Melbourne University. Thank you all for sharing your stories and your ideas. I'm a great believer in the power of story, and I think we all, story just is so powerful a mechanism for us as humans to enter into each other's worlds. But I wonder, do you think, and this isn't a question for one, it's maybe a question for all of you, is story enough to shift the monolithic problem of institutional disrespect and institutional neglect and governmental failing? Is story enough?
Story is one thing. So telling the story or narrative always touch human heart, but story itself without proper data, proper research that can also come and show that here is the thing, and that can pressure the politician or the policy makers. Sometimes they tend to ignore the stories because they don't have opportunity to listen to some of the stories that we have. People who are making decisions, let's say in a state, they are not here. Some of them are not sitting here, and tomorrow they will be the one sitting, making a decision on a particular document. So I believe that stories are very powerful. They are the one that touch us, our heart. But we also need people from academic, perspective to help us, to help the community, to help the society. So you have a role, and we in the community, we have a role to tell the story. But you have a role from academic point of view to document it and share it with, with the politician and policy makers. Thank you.
Thank you. A story is not really going to change anything. There could be, some people can hear it, listen to it, but it will not change anything. Yeah, as William mentioned, yes, documentation. I asked one of the MP in our area in Canberra, when I was in Canberra. He was a lecturer in the university, ANU. He did a research. He used a resume, a CV for a Chinese, for African, and a white Australian. One application. Just only a name, James Mayen, and William and Young from China, and Smith. And Smith will be called first, then the rest. The next will be Chinese, and then the last is African. So he used that assignment and to see whether there is really a systemic problem. He found out that there is a systemic problem. So I asked him, now you are a candidate to be in the parliament, what can we do to help us? He actually told us, keep writing, raise your voice. Not just about the history, but pointed out the issues. So really writing, and I like people like Evie and other people who wanted to get a good part of the negative, the community that have been seen as a negative, take a good part. Talk about the positive part, like we do talk about Australia positive part. And in fact, I went to America. Some of my friends in America, they are very desperate. And I said, I'm lucky to be in Australia. But why our kids are not using that being lucky in Australia? So it's something that we need to work together. So writing and supporting the community will actually change, because if there are more support than more negative on the community, when you keep talking to someone who say, you're the bad, you will be bad for good. And when you said you are the good, you will tend to be a good person. So maybe they'd work together. And I want to acknowledge the people that I do work with, in case if I get into trouble later on. Thank you for coming. I actually share the flyer, and it happened that the top leaders in the organization come. I work in a school, and the people sitting in front of me are my leaders, actually. Thank you for coming. I don't forget to mention you, but I don't want to single you out in case. So thank you for coming and see this presentation. I'm very happy to be in Mayen College. Reason mentioned by Ajak, I want to change the perception. Oh, they do this because I am black. I do talk to parents and young people tell me now,
I witnessed this case, this is not about the color. This is all about what we did. So accepting people like us who's in the institution will change something. Those who have negative or they have a low esteem to take their color as a scapegoat to complain about will have no space. We are the same. So I think having people like us in the institution will change things in a different way as well.
It would be great to hear from Daniel on the institution of the law as far as this question goes.
Look, I beg to differ in relation to the impact that stories can have, because that's where some people draw inspiration from. So if some of the positive stories are getting out through the right medium and through the right people, so people in power and people who do make this sort of like I said, people like Scott Morrison, people in power and sort of make choices about our life day in and day out. So if we can get the stories to them, and then you can only hope, because as an advocate, as a defence advocate, your role is to sell hope. That's what I do for a living. I've got to sell hope. So if we can sell hope to institution and to govern the people who make policy, and then I think there's really there's a real, I'm pretty optimistic. Like I think there's, and I after law school I've had work. I've always had work, so I haven't. And it's not even about being like South Sudanese. I've got Australian mates who've gone through law school, and I think it's a problem for all the university graduates across their field. There's just not enough jobs. There's just not. Everyone is copying it, unless if you got family members within the industry or people who are sort of your mentors and people who are there to pick, to sort of help you. And recently, the African Australian Lawyers Legal Network, which I and a couple of my colleagues, one of them is Nyadol Nguyen, who's sort of highly, when she's always putting her neck on the line for our community, like that's her bread and butter, sort of trying to hold government to account. And another colleague from Zimbabwe who's starting to read his cause at the bar in August actually. Yeah, I think she might have started last week. So she's from one or two African barristers who got a big bar, and that network is now up and running. We've had 4 of our members are starting a paid clerkship program in Victoria Legal Aid next week. So that's a foot in the door, and legal aid, the work legal aid does, actually communities like my community, actually the vulnerable in our society, whether you come from a low socioeconomic background or you're disadvantaged with the virtue you can't speak the English language. Like that's one of the criteria. If I'm at court and the accused person turns up at court and they can't speak English, that ticks our means test. So that person, because for them to participate in the fair hearing, they must have proper representation. So and now we've got our members who are African, some South Sudanese and some from other part of Africa. So if these after their clerkship programs, hopefully some of them will get jobs at legal aid, the solicitors, or go on to work at other firms. But that's again sort of that's creating opportunities and that's what other institutions can learn to do. NAB runs an African Australian inclusive program for grant, and it would have come from stories from people saying, "Well, I've got a degree, but I can't, I can't get a job." People sharing stories, and then someone who's at NAB, who's powerful and sort of just package that together and sold it to the board, and bang, you've got a program giving his or African Australian opportunities to be in the corporate space. So I think that there is, we can use stories to make a difference. So.
I'm conscious of the time. I'm just going to take one more question from Nick and one more round of responses from people.
Thanks, Melinda, and thank you very much, James, William, Ajak and Ibi, for being here tonight and sharing with us your inspiring and very hopeful stories. I do agree in the power of stories and narrative. I think it's what moves people to action, and I think we're humbled and privileged to have been, witness to what you've shared with us tonight. I also think it's incumbent on us who are, non-migrant Australians to say, the record of our country is absolutely disgraceful and shameful in the way that refugee and migrant populations have been treated, both getting here and being here, as you've shared. But I do want to just share a positive story that I know about and was part of my motivation for coming here tonight, that I've had the privilege to work with a South Sudanese gentleman also called Ajak. And he has been part of an initiative in Pakenham, working with 30 families from 10 different African countries and sharing land through a very generous fourth generation Australian dairy farmer in Longwarry. And they've started an initiative called the United African Farm, where they've been looking for land for many years, being settled out in Pakenham. They come, many of them from agrarian and agricultural backgrounds, and they've finally had an opportunity to actually work the land and grow okra and food crops that are appropriate for them. And so this is an invitation to everybody in this room, if you want to go this Saturday, so the day after tomorrow, United African Farm Facebook page, you are all invited to come and cheer with us on 24th of August 2019 at our Harvest Festival on our farm. This has been going now for 6 months. There will be various activities taking place, from harvesting, weeding, market showcase and drumming. Come and listen to the rhythm of the African drums, and that will be at 475 Princess Highway in Longwarry. It's about a 90-minute drive, but it's a fantastic experience. I was there in May, and I'd encourage you all to go and be part of a really hopeful and inspiring story.
Excellent. Thank you so much for giving us that nice note to end on. I'm going to end again by thanking our panel very much, and I'm going to invite everyone to come and join us, have a more casual chat, have a drink. If you would like, if you're here for the first time, please check out our website, sign up for future events. Even better, think about becoming a member of the Institute if you're in a position to do so. Most of what you have seen and witnessed and experienced tonight runs on the back of voluntary labour. Memberships and donations really help us breathe and help us fund and expand what we're doing here. So I want to thank Ibi in particular. I want to give a big plug for her book. She has brochures for a special discounted price on the book. If you are interested in that, then please catch up with Ibi. Oh, she's going to say something.
Yes, I do have the special discounted flyers, but I also wanted to tell you that if you are actually not in a position to be able to afford the book, please send me an email and say that you are one of my colleagues, and if you need that book for your research or your work purposes, I would be more than happy to share with you a PDF of the book.
Thanks very much. That's a very generous offer. There's so much more that can be said, but I think at this point I will just thank everyone again very much for the effort that you've made to come here. I know some of you have driven a long way, and you've done it at the end of a really long day as well. We're really deeply appreciative and very moved, and you've given us a lot to think about. I hope you'll come back again. I hope we can continue these discussions and be a part of sort of taking these discussions into kind of practical and hopeful terrain as well. So let's call it quits. Let's thank everyone for coming along.